Hello there, weary traveler, and welcome back to this cozy corner of history where we explore the stories that time tried to bury. Tonight, we're journeying to a world where a woman's empty womb was blamed on everything, from wandering organs that moved through her body like wild animals to punishments from God for sins she might never have committed. Whether you're nestled under warm blankets ready to drift off to sleep, or simply seeking to unwind with some gentle historical storytelling, I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend this evening with me. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from tonight and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know. It's always such a comfort to see our community of history enthusiasts gathered here from every corner of the globe. And if you find peace in these calm, immersive tales from ages past, go ahead and click that subscribe button so you don't miss our next journey together. But for now, let's allow the gentle weight of modern comfort to settle around you as we travel back to the stone walls of a physician's house in London, England, in the winter of 1427. Tonight, we're sitting beside a woman named Eleanor as she endures her 9th year of marriage without child, following a story that will remind us just how precious our modern understanding of reproductive medicine truly is, how fortunate we are to live in a time when medical ignorance doesn't masquerade as divine wisdom or demonic influence. Picture yourself settling deeper into your pillow as we begin this tale of Eleanor de Ashby, a goldsmith's wife, 27 years old, whose barren womb has become the subject of increasingly desperate and bizarre medical theories. Close your eyes if you wish, and let your breathing slow as we explore together what it meant to be a woman whose body refused to cooperate in a world where learned men believed her uterus might be wandering through her torso like a hungry animal, seeking the scent of sweet herbs and fleeing from foul odors. Take a deep breath with me now, feeling the softness of your bedding, the warmth of your room, the safety of your walls. Hold on to that comfort as we journey back 597 years to a world where medical treatments for infertility included everything from inserting hollow lead tubes into a woman's body to fumigating her with burning herbs, where physicians declared with absolute certainty that her womb was too hot or too cold, too wet or too dry, and where the failure to conceive could result in accusations of witchcraft that ended in flames. The February wind howls through the narrow streets of London as our story begins, and already we can sense the desperation that permeates the Ashby household like smoke from a smoldering fire. In your comfortable bed, surrounded by the knowledge that reproductive medicine is based on scientific understanding rather than ancient superstitions, perhaps you can begin to understand why Eleanor's hands shake as she submits to yet another bizarre treatment, why her prayers tonight carry the weight of someone who knows that her society's medical knowledge is not just useless, but actively dangerous. Let your breathing synchronize with mine as we step more deeply into Eleanor's world on this February evening in 1427, when the Black Death's devastation has passed, but left behind a society obsessed with replenishing what was lost, yet still clinging to medical theories that would seem laughable if they weren't so tragically applied to desperate women. The house on Cheapside stands prosperous and well-appointed, its success built on Hugh de Ashby's skill as a goldsmith to London's wealthy merchants. Yet for all its material comfort, the house feels cursed, its many chambers echoing with whispered theories about Eleanor's failure to conceive. Feel the weight of those medical theories as they press down upon Eleanor like stones. 27 years old, she has now endured 9 years of marriage to Hugh. 9 years of monthly disappointments that have slowly transformed from private sorrow into public medical spectacle. Contemporary records from medieval England, including extensive documentation from physicians' treatises and church court records, reveal that by the 1420s, medical theory around infertility had become a bizarre amalgamation of ancient Greek medicine, Christian theology, and superstitious folklore that created a perfect storm of dangerous nonsense. Rest comfortably in your safe bed as we witness how Eleanor's condition has been diagnosed by Master Geoffrey Blackwell, one of London's most respected physicians, a man who studied at the University of Paris and carries with him the accumulated wisdom of centuries. According to his learned opinion, Eleanor suffers from what the ancient Greeks called hysteria, caused by her womb, that most mysterious of organs, literally wandering through her body in search of moisture and pleasant smells, like a wild animal that has escaped its proper cage. The theory, as Master Geoffrey explains it with the confidence of a man who has never possessed a uterus himself, derives from the ancient physician Plato's description in his Timaeus. The womb is an animal which longs to generate children. When it remains barren too long after puberty, it gets discontented and angry, and wandering in every direction through the body, closes up the passages of the breath, and by obstructing respiration, drives them to extremity, causing all varieties of disease. This wandering organ, he tells Hugh with grave authority, can float freely within Eleanor's body, sometimes lodging beneath her heart and causing her to feel faint, sometimes pressing against her throat and making her voice weak, sometimes settling too low in her belly and refusing to remain in its proper place long enough for conception to occur. Feel the texture of rough linen beneath your fingers as we imagine Eleanor's special undergarments, designed according to Master Geoffrey's instructions to help coax her wandering womb back to its proper position. Unlike the comfortable underclothes you wear without thought to their supposed medical properties, Eleanor's shift has been treated with various aromatic herbs, sweet fennel, cinnamon, and musk, applied to the lower portion to attract her wayward uterus downward through pleasant scents. The upper portion has been deliberately treated with bitter wormwood and strong vinegar to repel the organ should it attempt to wander upward towards her heart or lungs. But the scent therapy is only the beginning of the treatments Eleanor has endured. Historical sources from this period, including the widely circulated medical compendium known as the Trotula and various contemporary treatises on women's medicine, reveal the full horror of 15th century gynecological practice. Master Geoffrey has also prescribed what he calls uterine fumigation, a process by which Eleanor must sit over a pot of boiling water infused with aromatic herbs, allowing the steam to penetrate her body and supposedly guide her wandering womb back to its proper position through olfactory manipulation. The fumigation sessions, conducted twice weekly in the Ashby household's private chamber, involve Eleanor disrobing and positioning herself over a specially constructed stool with a hole cut in the seat. Beneath her, Agnes the serving woman tends a brass brazier filled with glowing coals, over which various substances are burned according to Master Geoffrey's precise instructions. Sweet-smelling herbs like lavender and rosemary are meant to attract the womb downward, while foul-smelling materials like burned hair or old cheese are positioned near Eleanor's face to drive the organ away from her upper body. Breathe deeply and feel grateful for the medical knowledge available to you today, where reproductive health is understood through science rather than through these elaborate charades based on the notion that internal organs behave like wayward pets. Eleanor sits through these sessions with the patience of a woman who has exhausted all other options, inhaling smoke that makes her eyes water and her throat burn, while Agnes mutters prayers and Master Geoffrey takes careful notes about the supposed movements he claims to observe in Eleanor's abdomen. But the wandering womb theory is just one of several competing explanations for Eleanor's condition. Another school of medical thought, championed by the physician Master Robert de Ashby, who occasionally consults on Eleanor's case, holds that her infertility stems from an imbalance of the 4 humors that govern all human health. According to humoral theory, which dominated medieval medicine for centuries, Eleanor's body contains too much of certain humors and not enough of others, creating an environment hostile to conception. Master Robert has determined, through careful examination of Eleanor's urine color pulse rate, and general complexion that her womb suffers from an excess of cold and wet humours, making it inhospitable to the hot and dry nature of male seed. To correct this imbalance, he has prescribed a regimen of treatments designed to heat and dry Eleanor's reproductive organs. She must consume daily doses of wine mixed with ginger, cinnamon, and pepper. She must take hot baths infused with warming herbs like sage and thyme. Most challenging of all, she must submit to the application of hot poultices directly to her lower abdomen, linen cloths soaked in heated wine and pressed against her skin until she can barely tolerate the burning sensation. The humoral treatments leave Eleanor's skin inflamed and her digestion disrupted, but Master Robert assures Hugh that these discomforts are signs that the therapy is working, that Eleanor's cold and wet womb is gradually being transformed into the hot and dry environment necessary for conception. When Eleanor develops a rash from the hot poultices, Master Robert declares this a positive sign that the excess moisture is being drawn from her body. When she suffers from sleeplessness and anxiety from consuming the spiced wine, he explains that her humours are rebalancing themselves and that patience is required for the process to complete itself. Feel the frustration building within Eleanor as month after month passes without the desired result, while the learned physicians continue to adjust their treatments with absolute confidence in their theories. Your modern understanding of reproductive health, based on actual knowledge of ovulation, hormone cycles, and fertility factors, makes these medieval treatments seem not just ineffective, but actively harmful. Yet Eleanor has no choice but to submit to them, for the alternative, being branded as a woman who refuses medical help, could be even more dangerous to her social standing and marriage. As winter deepens into spring of 1427, a third medical opinion enters Eleanor's case in the form of Master William Thornbury, a physician who studied in Italy and brings with him knowledge of the most advanced medical thinking of his time. Master William proposes yet another theory for Eleanor's condition, that her womb has become suffocated due to the retention of menstrual blood and other corrupt humours that should have been expelled during pregnancy and childbirth. This suffocation of the uterus, he explains, prevents the organ from performing its natural function and must be relieved through direct intervention. The treatments Master William prescribes are even more invasive and uncomfortable than those that came before. Eleanor must submit to regular womb massages performed by a skilled midwife who inserts oil-covered fingers into Eleanor's body to manipulate what she claims are blockages preventing proper function. The procedure, conducted with Eleanor lying on her back with her knees drawn up, is both physically uncomfortable and deeply humiliating. The midwife, Dame Margaret, speaks throughout the process about what she claims to feel: a womb that is closed too tightly in some places and too slack in others, requiring manipulation to restore proper form. Additionally, Master William has prescribed the use of pessaries, small objects inserted into Eleanor's body and left in place for hours at a time. These pessaries are made from various materials according to different theories about what might open her supposedly closed womb. Some are carved from deer antler and soaked in rose oil. Others are fashioned from rolled linen soaked in honey and wine. The most uncomfortable are made from lead, shaped like small tubes and designed to remain in place overnight to dilate the passages that have become too narrow. The insertion and removal of these pessaries causes Eleanor considerable discomfort and has led to several infections that Master William dismisses as natural consequences of treating a corrupted womb. When Eleanor develops fever and pain from one of these infections, the physicians debate among themselves whether this indicates that the treatment is working by drawing out the corruption, or whether Eleanor's body is resisting the cure due to some moral failing on her part. It is during one of these infections, as Eleanor lies in her bed with fever and chills, that the fourth and most dangerous theory about her condition begins to take hold in the whispered conversations of the Ashby household. Dame Margaret, the midwife, mentions to Agnes, the serving woman, that she has seen cases like Eleanor's before, cases where no amount of medical treatment seems to help, cases where the woman's barrenness seems to have an unnatural quality that suggests supernatural interference. The suggestion spreads through the household like smoke, carried by the same servants who have watched Eleanor submit to treatment after treatment without result. Perhaps, they whisper, Eleanor's condition is not medical at all. Perhaps it is the result of witchcraft, either a curse placed upon her by an enemy, or worse, evidence that Eleanor herself has trafficked with dark forces and brought God's punishment upon herself through unholy practices. This fourth theory draws upon the widely circulated beliefs documented in texts like the Malleus Maleficarum, which would be published several decades later, but whose ideas were already circulating among clergy and educated laypeople in the 1420s. According to these beliefs, the devil and his servants could prevent conception in several ways: by poisoning the seed of either husband or wife, by creating physical obstacles within the woman's body, or by cooling the ardor between spouses so that they no longer desire each other with sufficient passion to create life. The evidence for supernatural interference in Eleanor's case seems compelling to those who seek it. Despite years of treatment by learned physicians, she remains barren. Despite Hugh's obvious virility, proved by his success in business and his strong physical constitution, their marriage remains childless. Despite Eleanor's apparent piety and regular attendance at church, her prayers for a child go unanswered. To minds already primed to see diabolic influence in unexplained phenomena, Eleanor's condition begins to look less like a medical problem and more like evidence of spiritual corruption. Master Geoffrey, the original physician, initially resists this supernatural explanation, insisting that Eleanor's wandering womb can be corrected through proper medical treatment if given sufficient time. But as months pass and Eleanor shows no signs of conception despite religiously following his prescriptions, even he begins to suggest that demonic interference might be preventing his treatments from working. Perhaps, he suggests to Hugh, they should consult with church authorities to determine if Eleanor has been the victim of maleficium, harmful magic practiced by enemies of their household. The suggestion terrifies Eleanor more than any of the painful medical treatments she has endured. To be suspected of involvement with witchcraft, even as a victim, is to invite scrutiny that could destroy not just her marriage, but her life. She has seen what happens to women who attract such suspicions: the interrogations, the public humiliation, the possibility of torture to extract confessions, and ultimately the flames that consume those found guilty of trafficking with Satan. Yet Eleanor finds herself in an impossible position. To refuse the suggestion that her case might involve witchcraft could itself be seen as suspicious. Why would an innocent woman object to investigation unless she had something to hide? To agree to such investigation opens her to dangers that terrify her even more than the prospect of remaining childless forever. Either path leads toward potential destruction, and Eleanor realizes with growing horror that her inability to conceive has transformed from a private sorrow into a public crisis that threatens everything she holds dear. Feel your heart rate slow to match Eleanor's as she lies awake in the pre-dawn darkness of her chamber, listening to the sounds of London beginning to stir beyond her windows. It is now early summer of 1427, and the suggestion of supernatural involvement in her condition has taken root in ways that fill her with dread. What began as whispered speculation among servants has now reached the attention of Father Edmund, the priest of St. Lawrence Jury, where the Ashby family worships, and his interest in Eleanor's case brings new dangers and new theories about her condition. Father Edmund approaches Eleanor's infertility from the perspective of moral theology rather than medical theory, and his interpretation of her condition adds yet another layer of complexity, to what has already become a bewildering array of supposed causes and treatments. According to his understanding, Eleanor's barrenness must be understood as either a test from God, a punishment for sin, or evidence of diabolic interference, and determining which of these applies requires careful examination of Eleanor's spiritual life and moral conduct. The priest's first theory draws upon biblical precedent, particularly the stories of Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel, all of whom experienced periods of barrenness before God blessed them with children in their old age. According to this interpretation, Eleanor's condition might be a divine test of faith, similar to the trials experienced by Job or the suffering of the holy martyrs. If this is the case, then patient endurance and increased devotion should eventually result in God opening Eleanor's womb as a reward for her faithfulness. This theory leads to a new regimen of spiritual treatments that supplement rather than replace the ongoing medical interventions. Eleanor must now attend Mass daily instead of weekly, participate in additional prayers at the canonical hours of terce, sext, and none, and make regular pilgrimages to local shrines associated with fertility and childbirth. She begins visiting the shrine of St. Thomas of Canterbury at the Church of St. Thomas of Acre, where she prays specifically for intercession in her case. She makes weekly journeys to the shrine of St. Margaret at the Church of St. Margaret Pattens, lighting candles and leaving small offerings in the hope that the patron saint of pregnant women will take pity on her condition. Most significantly, Father Edmund arranges for Eleanor to participate in a novena, 9 consecutive days of intensive prayer and fasting dedicated to requesting divine intervention in her case. During this novena, Eleanor must consume only bread and water, spend several hours each day in prayer, and sleep on the floor rather than in her comfortable bed as a form of penance that might persuade God to grant her request for a child. The physical discomfort of the fast, combined with the sleep deprivation from maintaining the prayer schedule, leaves Eleanor weak and dizzy. But Father Edmund assures her that such suffering is precisely what God requires to demonstrate the sincerity of her petition. Yet even as Eleanor submits to this spiritual regimen with the desperation of a woman who has exhausted all other options, Father Edmund begins to explore the darker possibilities suggested by her continued barrenness. If patient faith and increased devotion do not result in conception, then perhaps Eleanor's condition stems not from divine testing, but from divine punishment for sins that require identification and correction before God will remove his curse from her womb. The examination of Eleanor's potential sins begins with relatively minor transgressions that Father Edmund considers possible obstacles to divine blessing. Has Eleanor ever felt impatient with God's plan for her life? Has she ever envied other women their children? Has she ever complained about her condition in ways that suggest insufficient acceptance of God's will? These venial sins, while not damning in themselves, might accumulate over time to create a barrier between Eleanor and divine favor that requires sacramental confession and penance to remove. Eleanor confesses to such minor failings with relief, hoping that acknowledging them will satisfy Father Edmund's investigation and allow the spiritual treatment to proceed without deeper scrutiny. She admits to moments of envy when seeing mothers with their children, to occasions when she has questioned God's justice in denying her the blessing of motherhood, while granting it to women she considers less deserving, and to times when her patience with the divine plan has faltered under the weight of monthly disappointment. Father Edmund assigns appropriate penances for these sins, additional prayers, charitable donations, acts of service to the poor, and Eleanor performs them faithfully, hoping they will prove sufficient. But as summer progresses toward autumn without any sign of conception, Father Edmund's investigation deepens into more serious territories. Perhaps Eleanor's barrenness stems not from venial sins, but from mortal sins that require more dramatic intervention. Has Eleanor ever practiced any form of contraception to prevent pregnancy during the early years of her marriage? Has she ever sought the services of wise women or cunning folk for potions or charms related to fertility? Has she ever participated in any folk practices that might be considered superstitious or potentially diabolic? These questions terrify Eleanor because they venture into areas where innocent actions might be reinterpreted as evidence of serious wrongdoing. During the early years of her marriage, when she was young and not yet desperate for children, she had indeed consulted with Dame Alice, an elderly woman known for her knowledge of herbs and remedies, about ways to regulate her monthly courses and ensure they came at convenient times. Dame Alice had provided her with teas made from various plants and instructions for timing their consumption to influence when her bleeding would occur. At the time, this had seemed like practical household management rather than anything sinful, no different from using herbs to treat headaches or digestive complaints. But Eleanor realizes with growing fear that Father Edmund might interpret such practices as attempts to interfere with God's plan for procreation, or worse, as evidence that she had sought magical assistance that opened her soul to diabolic influence. The teas that had once seemed like harmless folk medicine now appear in her memory as potentially damning evidence of trafficking with supernatural forces. Similarly, Eleanor remembers participating in various folk practices related to fertility that had seemed innocent at the time, but now appear more sinister under theological scrutiny. She had joined other young wives in collecting mayflowers on the first day of May and weaving them into garlands worn during dancing around the maypole, a practice that emphasized fertility and the return of life to the world after winter. She had participated in the custom of leaping over midsummer bonfires with other women, believing it would bring good luck in conceiving children. She had worn charms and amulets provided by older women who claimed they would help her become pregnant. All of these practices had been common among the women of her social circle, engaged in openly and without any sense of wrongdoing. But Eleanor now realizes that Father Edmund might view them as evidence that she had sought supernatural assistance outside the proper channels of Christian prayer and sacramental grace. What had seemed like harmless traditions might be reinterpreted as dangerous flirtations with powers that opposed God's will and invited diabolic interference into her life. The investigation of Eleanor's potential spiritual failings coincides with a troubling development in her medical treatment. Master Geoffrey, still convinced that her condition stems from a wandering womb, has decided that more aggressive intervention is required to force the organ back into its proper position. He has obtained from Italy a new device recommended by physicians there, a hollow tube made of silver that can be inserted into Eleanor's body and used to inject various medicinal substances directly into her womb. The device, which Master Geoffrey refers to as a uterine syringe, represents the cutting edge of gynecological treatment according to the medical knowledge of the time. It allows physicians to deliver medications directly to the affected organ rather than relying on oral consumption or external application to achieve therapeutic effects. Master Geoffrey believes that by injecting combinations of heated wine, aromatic oils, and powdered herbs directly into Eleanor's womb, he can force it to resume its proper function and position within her body. The procedure itself is extraordinarily painful and degrading. Eleanor must position herself on a specially constructed table with her legs elevated and spread while Master Geoffrey and his assistants work with the device. The insertion of the silver tube causes sharp pain that makes Eleanor cry out despite her efforts to maintain composure. The injection of heated liquids creates sensations of burning and pressure that feel like torture rather than medicine. The entire process leaves Eleanor feeling violated and humiliated, but Master Geoffrey assures Hugh that such discomfort is necessary to achieve the desired therapeutic effects. What makes the procedure even more disturbing is that Master Geoffrey has begun to interpret Eleanor's reactions to the treatment as evidence supporting the supernatural theories about her condition. When Eleanor screams during the insertion of the device, he suggests that her pain might be unusually severe because diabolic forces are resisting the medical intervention. When she develops fever and infection following the injections, he theorizes that corrupt spiritual influences within her body are fighting against the purifying effects of the treatment. These interpretations create a horrible circular logic, where Eleanor's suffering from the treatments is taken as proof that more extreme treatments are necessary. Her pain becomes evidence of supernatural resistance that must be overcome through increased intervention. Her infections are signs of spiritual corruption being expelled from her body. Her weakness and exhaustion from months of invasive procedures are interpreted as the struggle between good and evil forces within her flesh. Meanwhile, the whispered speculation about Eleanor's condition continues to spread beyond the Ashby household into the wider community of their neighborhood. Dame Margaret, the midwife who performs the intimate manipulations prescribed by Master William, has begun sharing her observations with other women she serves, describing Eleanor's case as particularly puzzling and potentially unnatural. These conversations, conducted in the informal networks that connect London's women across social boundaries, carry Eleanor's story into taverns, market stalls, and other households where it becomes the subject of increasingly wild speculation. The story that emerges from these whispered conversations bears only partial resemblance to Eleanor's actual experience. In some versions, she is portrayed as a woman who deliberately refused to have children during her early years of marriage, and now finds herself cursed by God as punishment for her selfishness. In others, she becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of consulting with wise women and cunning folk, a respectable merchant's wife who fell prey to diabolic influences through her desperation to conceive. Most dangerously, some versions suggest that Eleanor's continued barrenness despite extensive treatment indicates that she herself possesses supernatural powers that she uses to prevent conception, perhaps as part of some larger scheme to avoid the responsibilities of motherhood. These rumors reach Hugh through his business contacts and social connections, creating new pressures on Eleanor's situation. Some of Hugh's fellow guild members begin to suggest that his association with a potentially cursed or supernaturally tainted wife might bring misfortune to his business ventures. Others recommend that he consider seeking an annulment of their marriage on grounds of Eleanor's suspected spiritual corruption, arguing that a man of his standing and prosperity deserves a wife capable of providing him with legitimate heirs. Hugh finds himself torn between loyalty to Eleanor, whom he genuinely loves and believes to be innocent of any wrongdoing, and the practical concerns of protecting his business and social position from the growing cloud of suspicion surrounding their marriage. The suggestions that he should abandon Eleanor cause him genuine anguish, but he cannot entirely dismiss the possibility that their childless state might indeed indicate some form of supernatural interference that could eventually threaten everything he has worked to build. The pressure of these competing theories and treatments begins to take a visible toll on Eleanor's physical and mental health. The constant medical interventions have left her body weak and often in pain. The invasive procedures have caused recurring infections that sap her strength and energy. The spiritual regimens of fasting and excessive prayer have made her thin and pale. Most troubling of all, the mounting suspicion about her condition has begun to affect her behavior in ways that unfortunately confirm rather than dispel the growing belief that something unnatural surrounds her case. Eleanor becomes increasingly anxious and fearful, jumping at unexpected sounds and avoiding eye contact with neighbors who might be silently judging her condition. She develops a nervous habit of touching the various fertility charms and religious medallions she wears, constantly checking to ensure they remain in place as protection against whatever forces might be working against her. Her sleep becomes disrupted by nightmares about being accused of witchcraft, dreams in which she finds herself standing before ecclesiastical judges who refuse to believe her protestations of innocence. Most unfortunately, Eleanor's growing desperation leads her to seek help from sources that will only worsen her situation if discovered. Hearing rumors about a cunning woman named Marjorie who lives in the marshes outside London and claims special knowledge about fertility problems that resist conventional treatment, Eleanor begins to contemplate seeking assistance that she knows Father Edmund would consider definitively diabolic. The very fact that Eleanor is considering such desperate measures represents a terrible transformation from the hopeful young wife she had been 9 years earlier. What began as a medical problem has evolved into a crisis that threatens to destroy not just her marriage and social standing, but potentially her life itself. The medieval world's bizarre theories about women's bodies, combined with its dangerous willingness to see supernatural explanations for natural phenomena, has created a trap from which Eleanor can see no escape. As autumn deepens toward winter in this year of 1427, Eleanor faces choices that all seem to lead toward disaster. She can continue submitting to the increasingly invasive and dangerous medical treatments, while hoping that Father Edmund's spiritual investigation will eventually vindicate her innocence. She can resist further treatment and face accusations that her refusal to cooperate proves her complicity in maintaining her cursed condition. Or she can seek help from the cunning woman Marjorie and risk confirming all the worst suspicions about her involvement with diabolic forces. Take a deeper breath now, dear listener, and feel the weight of your warm blankets as we follow Eleanor deeper into the maze of medieval ignorance and supernatural terror that has now consumed her life. It is December of 1427, and the approaching winter seems to mirror the darkness that has settled over the Ashby household. What began as a private sorrow about childlessness has evolved into a public crisis that threatens everything Eleanor holds dear, while the learned men who surround her continue to propose increasingly bizarre and dangerous solutions to her condition. The decision to seek help from Marjorie the cunning woman does not come easily to Eleanor. She spends weeks wrestling with the knowledge that consulting such a person will confirm her worst fears about herself, while potentially providing her only remaining hope for conception. The respectable physicians have failed her despite their confident theories and invasive treatments. The spiritual remedies prescribed by Father Edmund have produced no results despite her faithful compliance with every requirement. The whispered suspicions of her neighbors grow stronger with each passing month, and Eleanor realizes that her position becomes more precarious with every cycle that fails to bring the longed-for pregnancy. The journey to Marjorie's dwelling requires Eleanor to venture beyond London's walls into the marshy lowlands that surround the city, areas considered dangerous not just because of thieves and wild animals, but because they are known to shelter those who practice the old ways that the church considers suspect. Eleanor makes the journey on a December morning when thick fog provides cover for her movements, accompanied only by a young servant girl named Bess, who can be trusted to keep silent about their destination. Marjorie's hut sits on a small island of dry ground, surrounded by reed beds and stagnant pools that reflect the grey winter sky like mirrors made of pewter. The structure itself appears to have grown from the marsh rather than being built upon it. Its walls are made of mud and reeds, its roof thatched with water plants that continue to grow even in winter. Smoke rises from a hole in the center of the roof, carrying with it scents that Eleanor cannot identify, but that seem to speak of secrets hidden in the earth itself. The woman who emerges to greet Eleanor bears little resemblance to the terrifying hag that popular imagination associates with cunning folk. Marjorie appears to be perhaps 50 years old, with greying hair bound back in a simple coif, and wearing clothes that, while patched and faded, are clean and well-maintained. Her face shows the marks of a life spent outdoors, but her eyes are clear and intelligent, and her manner toward Eleanor is respectful rather than mysterious or threatening. Yet there is something about Marjorie that immediately makes Eleanor understand why the church considers such people dangerous. The cunning woman moves through her environment with a confidence that suggests she possesses knowledge about the natural world that extends far beyond what ordinary people understand. She speaks to the cats that wind around her legs, as if expecting them to answer. She touches plants growing near her hut in ways that suggest intimate familiarity with their properties. Most unsettling of all, she looks at Eleanor with eyes that seem to see more than just the surface of her situation. "You've come about the empty womb," Marjorie says without waiting for Eleanor to explain her purpose. "I can smell the physician's treatments on you, the burning herbs, the wine and spices, the metal implements. They've been filling you with fire and air when your body cries out for earth and water. No wonder their methods fail." The examination that Marjorie conducts differs dramatically from anything Eleanor has experienced with the licensed physicians. Rather than focusing on theories about wandering organs or humoral imbalances, Marjorie approaches Eleanor's condition as if it were a puzzle that can be solved through careful observation of practical signs. She studies Eleanor's hands, noting the condition of her nails and the lines of her palms. She examines her eyes, looking not just at their color, but at the clarity of the whites and the responsiveness of the pupils to changes in light. She asks detailed questions about Eleanor's monthly cycles, her appetite, her sleep patterns, and her dreams. Most surprisingly, Marjorie's examination reveals possibilities that none of the learned physicians had considered. She suggests that Eleanor's problem might stem not from supernatural interference or organs behaving like wild animals, but from practical physical conditions that could potentially be addressed through different approaches. Perhaps Eleanor's womb is positioned in a way that makes conception difficult. Perhaps her monthly cycles occur at times that do not align properly with her husband's availability. Perhaps her body requires different nutritional support than what she has been receiving. The learned men with their books and theories, Marjorie says with a mixture of contempt and pity. They treat women's bodies like broken machines that need forcing back into proper function. But a woman's womb is like a garden. It needs the right conditions to flourish, not violence and fire. She explains that Eleanor's body shows signs of exhaustion from the aggressive treatments she has endured, and that this exhaustion itself might be preventing conception by making her womb an inhospitable environment for new life. The remedies that Marjorie proposes differ dramatically from anything Eleanor has experienced. Instead of heating and drying treatments designed to correct supposed humoral imbalances, Marjorie recommends gentle, nourishing approaches that seem almost too simple to be effective. Eleanor should drink teas made from red clover and nettle to strengthen her blood. She should eat more eggs and fresh fish to provide her body with the building materials needed for creating new life. She should take warm baths infused with chamomile and lavender to help her body relax after months of traumatic medical interventions. Most importantly, Marjorie suggests that Eleanor and Hugh should abstain from attempting conception for 3 full months while Eleanor's body recovers from the damage inflicted by the physician's treatments. This recommendation horrifies Eleanor, who fears that any further delay will only strengthen the growing suspicions about her condition. But Marjorie insists that Eleanor's womb needs time to heal before it will be capable of supporting a pregnancy, and that continued attempts during this recovery period will only perpetuate the cycle of disappointment and increasingly desperate interventions. The wisdom of Marjorie's approach becomes apparent as Eleanor begins to follow her recommendations. Within weeks of abandoning the physician's harsh treatments and adopting Marjorie's gentle remedies, Eleanor begins to feel stronger and more energetic than she has in months. Her chronic infections clear up without the continued trauma of invasive procedures. Her appetite returns, and she begins to gain back some of the weight she had lost during the periods of fasting and purging prescribed by her previous healers. Most significantly, her monthly cycles become more regular and less painful than they had been during the aggressive medical treatments. Yet Eleanor's secret consultation with Marjorie creates new dangers, even as it offers hope for improvement in her condition. The cunning woman's remedies require ingredients that Eleanor must obtain without arousing suspicion about their source. Red clover and nettle can be purchased openly in markets, but Marjorie has also provided Eleanor with more exotic substances whose very possession could be interpreted as evidence of trafficking with diabolic forces. Among these is a small vial of oil made from what Marjorie calls moon herbs, plants that must be gathered during specific phases of the lunar cycle and prepared according to ancient traditions that predate Christian influence in England. Eleanor is to massage this oil into her lower abdomen each night, while reciting prayers that Marjorie has taught her. Prayers that invoke the protection of Saint Margaret and the Virgin Mary, but also include phrases in what sounds like a much older language that Eleanor does not recognize. The possession of such substances terrifies Eleanor, even as she uses them faithfully. She hides the vial in a secret compartment of her jewelry box, wrapped in blessed linen to disguise its scent, and protected by sacred medals to ward off any diabolic influences that might be associated with it. She applies the oil only when Hugh is absent from their chamber, washing her hands thoroughly afterward to remove any trace that might lead to discovery. She practices the prayers silently until she can recite them perfectly, knowing that any mistake in the ritual might render it ineffective, or worse, might accidentally invoke forces that could damn her soul. The psychological strain of maintaining these secrets while continuing to submit to the approved treatments prescribed by the licensed physicians and church authorities pushes Eleanor to the edge of emotional collapse. She must appear grateful for Master Geoffrey's continued fumigation treatments while secretly believing they are harmful to her recovery. She must participate enthusiastically in Father Edmund's spiritual remedies, while privately following rituals that he would consider heretical. She must smile and thank Master William for his invasive manipulations, while hoping that Marjorie's recommendations for healing will repair the damage they cause. This double life becomes even more complicated when Eleanor's improved health begins to attract notice from those around her. Hugh comments on her better appetite and increased energy, pleased to see his wife looking more like her former self after months of illness and exhaustion. Dame Margaret, the midwife, notes during her examinations that Eleanor's infections have cleared and that her body seems to be responding better to the prescribed treatments. Even Father Edmund observes that Eleanor appears more at peace during their spiritual consultations, as if her prayers are finally being heard. These improvements should be cause for celebration, but Eleanor realizes with growing terror that they may actually increase the danger of her situation. If her condition improves while she is secretly following Marjorie's recommendations, the discovery of her consultation with the cunning woman will be interpreted not as harmless folk medicine, but as proof that diabolic forces have been involved in her case all along. The very success of Marjorie's treatments will be taken as evidence that Eleanor has indeed been trafficking with supernatural powers that oppose Christian healing. The horrible irony of Eleanor's situation becomes clear as winter deepens toward the end of 1427. The sensible, gentle treatments recommended by a woman dismissed as potentially diabolic are actually helping her body recover from the damage inflicted by learned physicians whose theories are accepted as orthodox medical wisdom. The simple remedies that the Church would consider suspiciously pagan are proving more effective than the invasive procedures justified by centuries of scholarly tradition. The folk knowledge that educated men dismiss as superstitious nonsense demonstrates better understanding of women's bodies than the academic theories taught in universities. Yet Eleanor cannot reveal these truths without destroying herself. To admit that Marjorie's treatments are helping would be to confess involvement with forces that medieval society considers more dangerous than the medical torture sanctioned by official authorities. Eleanor finds herself trapped in a world where effective treatment is considered diabolic, while harmful intervention is blessed by both church and academy. As January of 1428 arrives, Eleanor faces the most terrifying development yet in her long ordeal. Dame Margaret, during one of her regular examinations, claims to detect changes in Eleanor's body that might indicate the beginning of pregnancy. The midwife notes that Eleanor's monthly bleeding is several days late, that her breasts seem slightly fuller than usual, and that there are subtle changes in the texture and position of her womb that suggest conception may have occurred. This news should fulfill Eleanor's deepest desires, but instead it fills her with dread. If she is indeed pregnant, the timing will inevitably raise questions about the cause of this sudden change in her condition. Master Geoffrey will claim credit for his fumigation treatments. Master William will attribute the success to his invasive manipulations. Father Edmund will praise the efficacy of increased prayer and spiritual discipline. But Eleanor knows that any of these men might also wonder why conception occurred now, after months of failed treatment, and whether supernatural forces might have played a role in this unexpected development. Worse still, if Eleanor is pregnant, the eventual discovery of her consultation with Marjorie becomes even more dangerous. A woman who conceived after seeking help from a cunning woman might be seen as having made a bargain with diabolic forces, trading her soul for the child she desired. The very fulfillment of her wishes could be interpreted as proof of supernatural involvement that puts both Eleanor and her potential child at risk of accusations of corruption by evil influences. The weeks that follow Dame Margaret's announcement become a time of agonizing suspense as Eleanor waits to learn whether she is truly pregnant, while dreading the consequences if she is. She continues to follow Marjorie's recommendations in secret, while outwardly expressing gratitude for the official treatments that everyone expects to claim credit for her condition. She participates in Hugh's growing excitement about the possibility of finally becoming a father, while privately fearing that their joy may soon turn to terror if the wrong questions are asked about the timing and circumstances of her conception. The complexity of Eleanor's situation reflects the broader tragedy of medieval medicine's approach to women's health. In a world where learned men believed that wombs wandered through bodies like wild animals, where infertility was attributed to everything from humoral imbalances to diabolic possession, where effective folk remedies were dismissed as superstitious while harmful academic theories were accepted as scientific truth, women like Eleanor found themselves caught between ignorance masquerading as knowledge and wisdom branded as heresy. Feel the tension building in your own body, dear listener, as we follow Eleanor through the winter weeks of 1428, when the possibility of pregnancy transforms her secret dealings with Marjorie from a desperate attempt to heal into potential evidence of diabolic bargaining. In your comfortable bed, surrounded by the assurance that pregnancy is understood through medical science rather than supernatural speculation, perhaps you can begin to grasp the full horror of Eleanor's position, where the fulfillment of her deepest desire may become the evidence used to destroy her. By February of 1428, the signs that Dame Margaret had detected proved to be accurate. Eleanor's monthly bleeding does not return. Her body begins to show the subtle changes that accompany early pregnancy, and she experiences the nausea and fatigue that medieval people recognized as confirmation of conception. What should be the happiest time of Eleanor's life instead becomes a period of escalating fear as she realizes that her pregnancy will inevitably lead to questions about its cause that she cannot safely answer. The official explanations for Eleanor's sudden fertility satisfy no one completely, least of all the learned men who have been treating her case. Master Geoffrey claims that his fumigation treatments have finally coaxed Eleanor's wandering womb back to its proper position, allowing conception to occur naturally. Master William insists that his invasive manipulations have cleared the blockages that prevented her womb from functioning correctly. Father Edmund attributes the pregnancy to divine intervention prompted by Eleanor's increased devotion and spiritual discipline. Each man presents his theory with absolute confidence, but Eleanor can sense their underlying uncertainty about why their treatments succeeded now when they had failed for so many months previously. More troubling still, the timing of Eleanor's conception coincides with several events that, in retrospect, seem ominous to those inclined to seek supernatural explanations. A merchant's wife in a neighboring parish has recently been accused of witchcraft after her own long barren marriage suddenly produced twins. There have been reports of strange lights seen in the marshes outside London, precisely where cunning folk like Marjorie are known to dwell. Most significantly, several other women in Eleanor's social circle who had suffered from fertility problems have also conceived during the same winter months, creating a pattern that some observers find suspiciously unnatural. These coincidences might have passed without comment in another time and place, but the atmosphere of 1428 London is particularly charged with suspicion about supernatural activity. The ongoing struggles between different factions within the church hierarchy have created a climate where religious orthodoxy is zealously defended, and any deviation from approved practices is viewed with extreme suspicion. The economic disruptions following the Black Death have left many people looking for explanations for their hardships that go beyond natural causes. The growing influence of academic medicine has created conflicts with traditional healing practices that make any consultation with folk healers increasingly dangerous. Into this volatile atmosphere comes a development that threatens to destroy Eleanor completely. Dame Margaret, the midwife who first detected Eleanor's pregnancy, begins to have second thoughts about the circumstances surrounding this sudden change in her patient's condition. During a conversation with Father Edmund about the spiritual aspects of Eleanor's care, Dame Margaret mentions her puzzlement about certain observations she has made during her examinations of Eleanor's body. According to Dame Margaret, Eleanor's womb shows signs of recent healing that seem inconsistent with the treatments she has been receiving from the licensed physicians. The chronic infections that had plagued Eleanor for months cleared up with unusual rapidity. Her body recovered from the exhaustion of invasive procedures more quickly than normal. Most puzzling of all, Dame Margaret claims to detect subtle changes in Eleanor's scent that suggest she has been using herbal preparations not prescribed by her official healers. These observations might seem like evidence of Eleanor's improving health to a modern understanding, but to medieval minds trained to seek supernatural explanations for unexplained phenomena, they suggest the possibility that Eleanor has been receiving assistance from sources she has not revealed to her authorized caregivers. Father Edmund begins to wonder whether Eleanor's sudden fertility might result from treatments obtained outside the proper channels of Christian healing, treatments that could potentially involve diabolic influence. The investigation that follows represents every woman's nightmare in a world where medical ignorance masquerades as learning and where folk wisdom is branded as heresy. Father Edmund approaches Eleanor with questions designed to determine whether she has sought unauthorized assistance for her fertility problems. Has she consulted with any healers other than the licensed physicians approved by church and guild authorities? Has she used any remedies not prescribed by Master Geoffrey, Master William, or the authorized medical practitioners? Has she participated in any rituals or practices that might be considered suspect by Orthodox Christian standards? Eleanor's answers to these questions will determine not just her own fate, but potentially the lives of her unborn child and anyone who might be implicated in accusations of providing her with diabolic assistance. To admit her consultation with Marjorie would confirm the worst suspicions about supernatural involvement in her case and could lead to charges of witchcraft that might result in imprisonment, torture, or death. To deny any unauthorized treatment would be a lie that could be disproven by witnesses who might have observed her journeys to the marshlands or her possession of suspicious substances. The dilemma paralyzes Eleanor with terror. She has seen what happens to women accused of trafficking with diabolic forces. The legal procedures surrounding witchcraft accusations are designed to extract confessions rather than establish innocence, and once such charges are brought, denial often serves only to confirm guilt in the minds of investigators convinced that diabolic influence enables accused witches to lie convincingly about their crimes. Eleanor realizes that any answer she gives to Father Edmund's questions may seal her doom. Yet silence is not an option either. Father Edmund's investigation has the full support of both church and secular authorities, who view the recent pattern of unexpected pregnancies among previously barren women as potentially indicating a coordinated campaign of supernatural interference in the natural order. Eleanor's refusal to cooperate with the investigation would itself be interpreted as evidence of guilt, proof that she has secrets too dangerous to reveal even to save her own life. The pressure of this impossible situation affects Eleanor's pregnancy in ways that further complicate her position. The stress of maintaining her secrets while undergoing increasingly intense questioning causes her to experience complications that medieval medicine interprets as additional evidence of supernatural involvement. She suffers from severe nausea that prevents her from eating properly, leading to weakness and weight loss that concern her caregivers. She develops insomnia that leaves her exhausted and emotionally fragile. Most troubling of all, she begins to experience cramping and bleeding that threaten the viability of her pregnancy. Master Geoffrey interprets these complications as signs that diabolic forces are attempting to destroy the child that Eleanor has conceived, proof that supernatural enemies oppose the natural order that should protect pregnant women and their unborn children. Master William suggests that Eleanor's body is rejecting the pregnancy because it was conceived through unnatural means that violate the proper relationship between human reproduction and divine will. Father Edmund sees the complications as evidence that Eleanor's soul is in conflict between the Christian faith she claims to embrace and the diabolic influences she may have invoked to achieve conception. All three men agree that Eleanor requires immediate and intensive intervention to save both her physical health and her spiritual condition. They prescribe a regimen of treatments designed to expel any diabolic influences that might be affecting her pregnancy, while strengthening her body's natural ability to support the developing child. These treatments represent the worst aspects of medieval medical practice, combining invasive physical procedures with spiritual disciplines that amount to psychological torture. The physical treatments include increased fumigation with burning herbs intended to drive away evil influences, more frequent and painful examinations to monitor changes in Eleanor's condition, and the administration of strong purgatives designed to cleanse her body of any corrupting substances she might have consumed. Eleanor must submit to having blessed oils applied to her skin while prayers are recited over her, undergo regular bloodletting to reduce the excess humors that might be affecting her pregnancy, and consume daily doses of wine mixed with powdered holy relics that are supposed to provide protection against supernatural attack. The spiritual treatments are even more grueling. Eleanor must participate in extended prayer sessions that last for hours at a time, often conducted in Latin that she does not understand, but that Father Edmund assures her contains powerful protections against diabolic influence. She must fast on designated days to demonstrate her commitment to purifying her soul of any corruption that might affect her unborn child. She must confess her sins repeatedly and in increasing detail, as Father Edmund searches for evidence of the spiritual failings that he believes must underlie her suspected involvement with supernatural forces. Most terrifying of all, Eleanor must submit to what Father Edmund calls spiritual examination, intensive questioning designed to reveal any hidden involvement with diabolic forces that might be affecting her case. These sessions take place in the sacristy of St. Lawrence Jury, with Eleanor seated on a hard wooden stool, while Father Edmund and sometimes other clergy members interrogate her about every aspect of her life, her thoughts, her dreams, and her actions during the months leading up to her conception. The questions begin with relatively innocuous inquiries about Eleanor's prayer life, her attendance at Mass, and her observance of religious holidays. But they gradually become more invasive and threatening as Father Edmund probes for evidence of the supernatural involvement he is convinced must exist. Has Eleanor ever experienced unusual dreams that might represent diabolic communication? Has she ever felt compelled to perform actions that seemed to come from sources outside her own will? Has she ever encountered strange animals or unusual phenomena that might indicate the presence of supernatural forces? Eleanor's answers to these questions must be carefully calculated to avoid both obvious lies that could be disproven and admissions that could be interpreted as confessions of guilt. When Father Edmund asks about unusual dreams, Eleanor must acknowledge the nightmares that have plagued her sleep, without revealing that they began after her consultation with Marjorie. When he inquires about compelling urges, she must admit to the desperate impulses that led her to seek unauthorized treatment without specifying the actions she actually took. When he probes for encounters with strange phenomena, she must navigate between denial that would seem implausible and admissions that could be interpreted as evidence of diabolic contact. The strain of maintaining this careful balance while pregnant and under intense physical and emotional stress begins to affect Eleanor's ability to think clearly and respond appropriately to the increasingly complex questions. She finds herself making small contradictions in her answers, forgetting details of previous statements, and sometimes responding with confusion or apparent evasion that Father Edmund interprets as evidence that she is being influenced by forces that oppose truthful revelation. Meanwhile, Eleanor's pregnancy continues to progress despite the complications caused by stress and aggressive medical intervention. By March of 1428, her condition becomes visible to casual observers, and the news of her expected child spreads throughout London's merchant community. This development should bring joy and celebration, but instead it intensifies the scrutiny surrounding her case as more people become aware of the unusual circumstances that preceded her conception. The pattern of previously barren women conceiving during the same period has now attracted attention from church authorities beyond Father Edmund's parish. Officials from the Bishop of London's office begin making inquiries about the cases, seeking to determine whether the simultaneous fertility of multiple long barren women represents a coordinated supernatural campaign that requires investigation by higher ecclesiastical authorities. Eleanor realizes with growing horror that her individual case is becoming part of a larger investigation that could result in accusations of conspiracy involving multiple women and potentially extending to anyone who might have provided them with unauthorized assistance. The expansion of the investigation brings new dangers as church officials with experience in witchcraft cases begin to apply their specialized knowledge to Eleanor's situation. These men possess sophisticated understanding of the legal procedures surrounding supernatural crimes, the methods used to extract confessions from accused witches, and the theological principles that guide the interpretation of evidence in such cases. Their involvement transforms Eleanor's case from a local matter handled by her parish priest into a formal ecclesiastical investigation with the power to impose punishments ranging from public penance to imprisonment or death. The trial of faith and fear. Rest more deeply into your pillows now, dear listener, and feel the safety of your modern world as we witness Eleanor's descent into the nightmare machinery of medieval justice, where ignorance masquerades as wisdom and where the very attempt to heal becomes evidence of damnation. It is now April of 1428, and Eleanor's pregnancy, which should be nearing its most joyful phase, has instead become the centerpiece of an ecclesiastical investigation that threatens to consume not just her, but everyone who has shown her kindness during her long ordeal. The formal investigation begins with the arrival of Master Thomas Neville, a canon lawyer from the Bishop of London's court who specializes in cases involving suspected supernatural crimes. Master Thomas brings with him not just legal authority, but years of experience in extracting confessions from accused witches and a theological framework that interprets virtually any unusual circumstance as potential evidence of diabolic interference. His presence in the Ashby household transforms Eleanor's private medical crisis into a public spectacle that attracts attention from throughout London's merchant community. Master Thomas approaches Eleanor's case with the methodical precision of a man who has investigated dozens of similar accusations. He begins by reviewing all the evidence that has been gathered by Father Edmund and the various physicians who have treated Eleanor's condition. He examines the detailed records that Master Geoffrey has kept of his fumigation treatments, looking for patterns that might indicate supernatural resistance to medical intervention. He studies Master William's notes about the infections and complications Eleanor experienced, searching for signs that her body was rejecting Christian healing in favor of diabolic assistance. Most significantly, Master Thomas interviews Dame Margaret at length about her observations of Eleanor's condition, particularly the mysterious improvements in Eleanor's health that preceded her conception. The midwife, now frightened by the serious turn the investigation has taken, provides increasingly detailed accounts of the subtle signs she had noticed: the unusual rapidity with which Eleanor's infections cleared, the changes in her scent that suggested the use of unauthorized herbal preparations, and the general improvement in her condition that seemed inconsistent with the treatments she was officially receiving. These testimonies provide Master Thomas with the foundation for a formal accusation against Eleanor, but he requires additional evidence to support charges that could result in severe punishment. The legal standards for witchcraft cases demand either clear confession from the accused or corroborating testimony from multiple witnesses who can provide specific details about supernatural activities. Master Thomas begins seeking such evidence through a process that combines legal investigation with psychological intimidation designed to pressure Eleanor into admitting involvement with diabolic forces. The interrogation sessions take place in a chamber within St. Lawrence Jury that has been specially prepared for such proceedings. Eleanor must sit on a bare wooden stool in the center of the room, while Master Thomas, Father Edmund, and sometimes other church officials surround her at a table covered with law books, medical treatises, and theological texts that they consult to interpret her answers. The setting is designed to emphasize Eleanor's isolation and vulnerability, while demonstrating the vast learning and authority of her interrogators. The questions that Master Thomas poses differ significantly from Father Edmund's earlier inquiries in their sophistication and their obvious purpose of building a legal case against Eleanor. Rather than asking general questions about her spiritual life or medical treatment, Master Thomas seeks specific admissions that can be interpreted as confessions of supernatural involvement. Has Eleanor ever promised anything to forces other than God in exchange for help with her fertility problems? Has she ever participated in rituals that involved invoking names or powers not recognized by Christian authority? Has she ever received substances or instructions from individuals known to practice forbidden arts? Eleanor's responses to these questions require even more careful calculation than her previous answers to Father Edmund. She must avoid both obvious lies that could be disproven by investigation and admissions that could be twisted into confessions of guilt. When Master Thomas asks about promises made to non-Christian forces, Eleanor must acknowledge her desperate prayers for help, while denying any intention to invoke diabolic assistance. When he inquires about unauthorized rituals, she must admit to folk practices that might seem innocent while denying knowledge of their potentially suspect origins. When he probes for connections to known practitioners of forbidden arts, she must navigate the dangerous territory between denial and admission without revealing her consultation with Marjorie. The psychological pressure of these interrogations is intensified by Master Thomas's use of techniques specifically designed to break down the resistance of accused witches. He asks the same questions repeatedly with slight variations, looking for inconsistencies in Eleanor's answers that could indicate deception. He presents her with false information about what other witnesses have supposedly revealed, hoping to trick her into confirming details that would support charges against her. He alternates between sympathetic encouragement, designed to elicit confessions, and harsh accusations intended to frighten her into submission. Most terrifyingly, Master Thomas begins to suggest that Eleanor's pregnancy itself provides evidence of supernatural involvement in her case. He points out that conception occurred only after months of failed treatment by licensed physicians, implying that human medicine proved inadequate and that Eleanor must have sought assistance from other sources. He notes that her pregnancy shows signs of progressing normally, despite the complications she experienced, suggesting that unnatural forces might be protecting the developing child for their own purposes. He even implies that the timing of her conception, coinciding with similar pregnancies among other previously barren women, indicates a coordinated supernatural campaign that Eleanor must have participated in knowingly. These suggestions terrify Eleanor because they transform what should be the greatest blessing of her life into evidence that could damn her. Every sign of her pregnancy's health becomes suspect. Every improvement in her condition is interpreted as proof of diabolic assistance. The very fulfillment of her deepest desires is reframed as evidence of a bargain with evil forces that threatens both her soul and her unborn child. The investigation expands beyond Eleanor herself to include anyone who might have provided her with unauthorized assistance or who might have knowledge of her activities during the months preceding her conception. Hugh faces intensive questioning about his wife's behavior, her contacts with other people, and any changes he might have observed in her habits or appearance. The servants of the Ashby household are interrogated about Eleanor's movements, her visitors, and any unusual substances or activities they might have witnessed. Even Eleanor's neighbors and acquaintances find themselves subject to inquiry about their interactions with her and their observations of her condition. This expansion of the investigation creates a web of fear and suspicion that extends far beyond Eleanor's individual case. People who had shown her kindness or offered informal advice about fertility treatments now find themselves potentially implicated in accusations of supernatural involvement. Women who had shared folk remedies or traditional practices with Eleanor begin to worry that their innocent assistance could be reinterpreted as evidence of organized diabolic activity. The atmosphere of mutual suspicion that develops makes it increasingly difficult for anyone to come forward with testimony that might help Eleanor without risking accusations against themselves. Most dangerously for Eleanor, the investigation eventually leads Master Thomas to focus on the period when her health began to improve most dramatically, the weeks following her secret consultation with Marjorie. His inquiries reveal that Eleanor made several unexplained absences from her household during this time, journeys that she cannot account for without revealing her visit to the cunning woman. Witnesses report seeing Eleanor in parts of London far from her normal activities, sometimes accompanied by a servant girl who now refuses to discuss their destinations. These observations provide Master Thomas with evidence of clandestine activities that Eleanor has concealed from her authorized caregivers and that coincide precisely with the improvements in her condition that led to her pregnancy. The discovery of Eleanor's secret activities creates a crisis that threatens to destroy not just her, but everyone who might be connected to them. Master Thomas demands that Eleanor reveal the true purpose of these hidden journeys and the identities of anyone who provided her with unauthorized assistance. Eleanor realizes that any truthful answer will implicate Marjorie in charges of practicing forbidden arts and will confirm all the suspicions about supernatural involvement in her case. Yet continued denial in the face of mounting evidence will only convince Master Thomas that she is being protected by diabolic forces that enable her to lie convincingly about her crimes. The dilemma paralyzes Eleanor with terror as she recognizes that she has reached the point where no answer can save her from the consequences of seeking help outside the approved channels of Christian healing. Her pregnancy, now visibly advanced and apparently healthy, stands as living proof that she obtained assistance that the licensed physicians could not provide. The very success of Marjorie's gentle remedies has become evidence that Eleanor trafficked with forces that oppose Christian authority and medical orthodoxy. As spring progresses toward summer in 1428, Eleanor's case attracts attention from beyond London as news of the investigation spreads to other ecclesiastical centres. Officials from Canterbury and York begin making inquiries about similar cases in their jurisdictions, seeking to determine whether the pattern of unexpected pregnancies among previously barren women extends beyond London and might indicate a broader supernatural campaign requiring coordinated church response. Eleanor realizes with growing horror that her individual struggle with infertility has become part of a larger moral panic that could result in widespread persecution of women who sought unauthorized assistance with fertility problems. The expansion of the investigation coincides with increasing complications in Eleanor's pregnancy that her interrogators interpret as evidence of supernatural forces attempting to intervene in the legal proceedings. She develops severe headaches that leave her unable to concentrate during questioning sessions. She experiences episodes of dizziness and weakness that sometimes cause her to faint during interrogations. Most alarming of all, she begins to show signs of premature labor that threaten the survival of her unborn child. Master Geoffrey interprets these complications as proof that diabolic forces are attempting to destroy the evidence of Eleanor's supernatural bargain before it can be born and potentially reveal the true extent of her involvement with evil powers. Master William suggests that Eleanor's body is rejecting the pregnancy because the child was conceived through unnatural means that violate God's plan for human reproduction. Father Edmund sees the complications as divine punishment for Eleanor's spiritual corruption, evidence that God is withdrawing his protection from both mother and child. All three men agree that Eleanor requires immediate and intensive intervention to save her pregnancy and force her to confess the full extent of her involvement with supernatural forces before it is too late to extract the truth. They prescribe treatments that combine the worst aspects of medical ignorance with theological brutality, subjecting Eleanor to procedures that amount to torture, justified by the supposed necessity of saving her soul and protecting Christian society from diabolic contamination. The final phase of Eleanor's ordeal represents the ultimate convergence of medieval medicine's ignorance about women's bodies with the Church's paranoid fear of supernatural influence. As she lies in her chamber, racked with pain from both her pregnancy complications and the aggressive treatments designed to force confessions from her, Eleanor embodies the tragic fate of countless women who fell victim to a world where seeking help for fertility problems could be interpreted as evidence of diabolic bargaining, where folk wisdom was branded as heresy, and where the very attempt to heal was transformed into proof of damnation. Let your breathing grow deeper and more peaceful now, dear listener, as we approach the climax of Eleanor's terrible ordeal, understanding that her story, while extreme, represents the fate of countless women who dared to seek relief from conditions that medieval medicine could not understand. It is now July of 1428, and Eleanor's pregnancy has progressed to its final weeks, despite the complications caused by stress, invasive medical treatments, and the psychological torture of ongoing investigation into her suspected supernatural activities. The investigation has now consumed not just Eleanor's life, but the lives of everyone connected to her case. Master Thomas Neville's inquiries have expanded to include dozens of women throughout London who had consulted with folk healers, wise women, or cunning folk about fertility problems. Several of these women have been arrested and imprisoned while church authorities attempt to extract confessions that would reveal the full extent of what they believe to be an organized campaign of diabolic interference in Christian society. The climate of fear and suspicion has made it dangerous for any woman to seek help for medical problems outside the approved channels of licensed physicians and orthodox religious healing. Marjorie the Cunning Woman has become the central figure in what Master Thomas now characterizes as a conspiracy of diabolic healers who prey upon desperate women by offering supernatural assistance in exchange for their souls. Church authorities have launched intensive efforts to locate and arrest Marjorie, searching the marshlands outside London and interrogating anyone who might have knowledge of her whereabouts. Eleanor realizes with growing terror that Marjorie's capture would provide Master Thomas with a witness whose testimony, extracted through torture if necessary, could confirm all the suspicions about Eleanor's involvement with forbidden practices. The physical toll of Eleanor's ordeal has become severe as her pregnancy progresses under the stress of ongoing investigation and aggressive medical treatment. She has lost significant weight despite being in the final months of pregnancy, leaving her looking gaunt and ill. Her hair has begun to fall out from the stress and poor nutrition caused by the frequent fasting prescribed as spiritual discipline. Most alarming of all, she has developed a condition that Master Geoffrey characterizes as melancholia, periods of profound depression and despair that sometimes leave her unable to respond coherently to questions during interrogation sessions. Master Geoffrey interprets Eleanor's deteriorating mental state as evidence that diabolic forces are attempting to prevent her from confessing the full truth about her supernatural activities. He prescribes treatments designed to strengthen her mind's resistance to diabolic influence, including the administration of holy water mixed with wine, the application of blessed oils to her forehead and temples, and exposure to holy relics that are supposed to repel evil spirits that might be controlling her thoughts and speech. Master William focuses on the physical complications of Eleanor's pregnancy, which he interprets as signs that supernatural forces are attempting to destroy the evidence of her diabolic bargain before it can be born and examined for signs of unnatural conception. He prescribes increasingly invasive procedures designed to monitor the developing child and ensure its survival long enough to provide testimony about the circumstances of its creation. These procedures involve repeated examinations with metal instruments, the injection of blessed substances into Eleanor's womb, and the application of hot poultices designed to strengthen her body's ability to carry the pregnancy to term. Father Edmund concentrates on what he considers the spiritual aspects of Eleanor's condition, interpreting her mental distress as evidence of a soul in conflict between Christian faith and diabolic influence. He prescribes extended prayer sessions designed to drive out evil spirits, intensive confession sessions aimed at extracting admissions of supernatural involvement, and participation in religious ceremonies intended to purify Eleanor's soul of any corruption that might affect her unborn child. The combined effect of these treatments is to transform Eleanor's final weeks of pregnancy into a nightmare of physical and psychological torture, justified by the supposed necessity of saving her soul and protecting Christian society from diabolic contamination. She must submit to painful medical procedures while participating in grueling spiritual exercises, all while maintaining the pretense that she is grateful for the help being provided by her authorized caregivers. The most terrifying aspect of Eleanor's situation is her growing realization that the birth of her child will not end her ordeal, but will instead intensify it in ways that could prove fatal to both mother and infant. Master Thomas has made it clear that he intends to examine the newborn child for signs that might indicate supernatural involvement in its conception. Any unusual characteristics, birthmarks, physical anomalies, or even exceptional health or beauty could be interpreted as evidence of diabolic influence. The child's behavior after birth will be scrutinized for signs of unnatural intelligence or other worldly knowledge that might confirm suspicions about the circumstances of its creation. Even more frightening is Master Thomas's suggestion that Eleanor herself will face intensified interrogation after giving birth, when the physical stress of pregnancy can no longer be used as an excuse for incomplete or contradictory answers to his questions. He has made it clear that he expects the birth to provide new evidence that will allow him to build a definitive case against Eleanor, either through examination of the child or through Eleanor's own testimony extracted without the complications caused by her pregnant condition. The prospect of intensified interrogation after childbirth terrifies Eleanor, because she knows that her physical and mental condition will make it even more difficult to maintain the careful balance between truthful responses and dangerous admissions that has allowed her to survive the investigation thus far. The stress and exhaustion of giving birth, combined with the emotional vulnerability that follows childbirth, will leave her even more susceptible to the psychological techniques that Master Thomas uses to extract confessions from accused witches. As August approaches and Eleanor's labor draws near, the investigation reaches a crisis point with the capture of Marjorie the Cunning Woman. Church authorities locate her dwelling in the marshlands after following information extracted from other women who had consulted with her about fertility problems. Marjorie's arrest sends waves of terror through London's community of women who had sought unauthorized assistance with medical problems, and Eleanor realizes that her secret consultation with the Cunning Woman will soon be revealed through testimony extracted under torture. The interrogation of Marjorie provides Master Thomas with exactly the evidence he has been seeking to build a definitive case against Eleanor and the other women suspected of involvement with diabolic healing practices. Under the threat of torture, Marjorie admits to providing herbal remedies and folk treatments to numerous women suffering from fertility problems. She describes the specific substances she gave to each client, the rituals she taught them to perform, and the prayers she instructed them to recite. Most damaging of all from Eleanor's perspective, Marjorie provides detailed testimony about Eleanor's visit to her dwelling and the specific treatments she prescribed for Eleanor's condition. Marjorie's confession reveals the full extent of Eleanor's deception in concealing her consultation with unauthorized healers. The Cunning Woman describes Eleanor's desperate state when she first arrived at the marsh dwelling, her willingness to try any remedy that might help her conceive, and her careful adherence to the gentle treatments that Marjorie prescribed as alternatives to the harsh interventions recommended by the licensed physicians. The testimony provides Master Thomas with specific evidence of Eleanor's involvement with forbidden practices that he can use to support formal charges of trafficking with diabolic forces. Most terrifyingly for Eleanor, Marjorie's confession includes details about the timing of Eleanor's conception that suggest supernatural involvement in her pregnancy. According to Marjorie's testimony, Eleanor conceived within weeks of beginning the herbal treatments and ritual practices that the Cunning Woman had prescribed, after years of failed attempts using orthodox medical and spiritual remedies. This timing, Master Thomas argues, provides clear evidence that Eleanor's pregnancy resulted from diabolic assistance rather than natural conception, making both Eleanor and her unborn child subject to the full penalties prescribed by church law for supernatural crimes. The revelation of Eleanor's secret consultation with Marjorie transforms her case from one of suspected supernatural involvement to one of proven trafficking with diabolic forces. Master Thomas prepares formal charges against Eleanor that include not just seeking unauthorized medical treatment, but deliberately concealing her involvement with forbidden practices and allowing orthodox healers to claim credit for results achieved through diabolic assistance. These charges carry penalties ranging from public penance and excommunication to imprisonment and potentially death, depending on the extent of supernatural involvement that can be proven. Eleanor's labor begins on a sweltering August morning in 1428, with the knowledge that the birth of her child will coincide with the final phase of the ecclesiastical investigation that now threatens to destroy her. The attending midwives include not just Dame Margaret, but also women appointed by Master Thomas to observe and record any unusual circumstances surrounding the birth that might provide evidence of supernatural involvement. Eleanor must endure the pain and stress of childbirth while knowing that every aspect of the process is being scrutinized for signs that could confirm her guilt and seal her fate. The birth itself proceeds normally despite the extraordinary circumstances surrounding it, with Eleanor delivering a healthy son after a labor that lasts throughout the day and into the evening. The child shows no obvious signs of the supernatural influence that Master Thomas had expected to find, appearing in every way to be a normal infant born of natural conception. This absence of clear diabolic markings initially puzzles Eleanor's interrogators, who had anticipated that a child conceived through supernatural means would bear obvious signs of its unnatural origins. However, Master Thomas quickly reinterprets the child's normal appearance as evidence of the sophisticated nature of the diabolic deception involved in Eleanor's case. According to his analysis, the forces that assisted Eleanor's conception were clever enough to ensure that the resulting child would appear natural to casual observation, making it more dangerous because its corruption would be hidden beneath a facade of innocence. The very normalcy of Eleanor's son becomes, in Master Thomas's twisted logic, proof of the advanced diabolic influence involved in his creation. The days following Eleanor's delivery bring new horrors as Master Thomas prepares to intensify his investigation, now that the complications of pregnancy no longer provide obstacles to intensive interrogation. Eleanor, weakened by childbirth and struggling with the demands of caring for a newborn while facing accusations that could result in her death, finds herself less able than ever to maintain the careful responses that have kept her alive throughout the investigation. Her exhaustion and emotional vulnerability make her increasingly susceptible to the psychological pressure that Master Thomas applies to extract confessions. The interrogation sessions that resume within days of Eleanor's delivery represent the worst aspects of medieval justice applied to a woman at her most vulnerable moment. Eleanor must answer complex questions about her spiritual condition and supernatural activities, while dealing with the physical recovery from childbirth and the emotional challenges of new motherhood. Master Thomas deliberately schedules interrogation sessions to coincide with times when Eleanor's infant son requires feeding, using her maternal responsibilities as additional pressure to encourage rapid confessions that would allow her to return to caring for her child. The questioning focuses on the specific details of Eleanor's consultation with Marjorie, with Master Thomas demanding that Eleanor acknowledge not just the fact of her unauthorized treatment, but her full understanding of its diabolic nature. He argues that Eleanor's willingness to seek help from a known practitioner of forbidden arts demonstrates her deliberate choice to traffic with supernatural forces, making her guilty not just of receiving diabolic assistance, but of actively seeking it despite knowing the spiritual dangers involved. Eleanor's attempts to explain her consultation with Marjorie as desperate recourse to folk medicine rather than conscious trafficking with diabolic forces failed to satisfy Master Thomas, who interprets her explanations as evidence of the sophisticated deception that diabolic influence enables in its victims. According to his theological understanding, the devil's greatest success comes from convincing people that they are engaged in harmless activities when they are actually participating in supernatural crimes that damn their souls. Eleanor's belief that she was simply trying alternative medical treatments is, in Master Thomas's view, proof of how completely she has been deceived by diabolic influences. The investigation reaches its climax when Master Thomas presents Eleanor with Marjorie's detailed confession about the specific rituals and substances involved in her treatment. Faced with precise testimony about her secret activities, Eleanor can no longer maintain the pretense that she sought only orthodox medical care. She must choose between admitting her consultation with the cunning woman and continuing to deny involvement that can now be proven through witness testimony extracted under threat of torture. Eleanor's decision to acknowledge her consultation with Marjorie while maintaining that she believed it to be harmless folk medicine rather than diabolic practice provides Master Thomas with the confession he needs to support formal charges against her. Her admission of seeking unauthorized treatment, combined with Marjorie's testimony about the specific supernatural elements involved in that treatment, gives Master Thomas legal grounds to pursue the full penalties prescribed by church law for trafficking with diabolic forces. The formal charges that Master Thomas brings against Eleanor include practicing maleficium through the use of forbidden substances and rituals, deceiving authorized healers about the true source of her pregnancy, and corrupting the natural order by conceiving a child through supernatural rather than divine assistance. These charges reflect the medieval church's deep fear of any challenge to its monopoly over healing and its interpretation of any unauthorized medical success as evidence of diabolic intervention in Christian society. Take another deep breath with me now, dear listener, as we witness the conclusion of Eleanor's terrible journey through the maze of medieval ignorance and superstition that has transformed her desperate search for motherhood into evidence of supernatural crime. It is now September of 1428, and Eleanor faces the final judgment of an ecclesiastical court that will determine whether her successful pregnancy represents divine blessing or diabolic corruption, whether her newborn son will grow up with his mother or become an orphan because of the medical assistance she sought in desperation. The formal trial that Master Thomas conducts represents the culmination of medieval society's tragic inability to distinguish between effective healing and supernatural crime. Eleanor stands before a panel of church officials who possess vast learning in theology and canon law, but no understanding of women's reproductive health beyond the bizarre theories inherited from ancient authorities. These learned men examine the evidence of Eleanor's case through the lens of a worldview that interprets any unexplained medical success as potential proof of diabolic intervention, making Eleanor's recovery from infertility evidence against her rather than testimony to the effectiveness of gentle folk remedies. The testimony presented against Eleanor includes detailed accounts from Master Geoffrey about the failure of his fumigation treatments to produce conception until Eleanor began secretly following unauthorized remedies. Master William provides evidence about the suspicious rapidity with which Eleanor's chronic infections cleared after she began consulting with Marjorie. Father Edmund testifies about Eleanor's deceptive responses during spiritual counseling sessions, arguing that her ability to lie convincingly about her activities demonstrates diabolic influence over her speech and thoughts. Most damaging of all is Marjorie's coerced confession, which provides specific details about the herbal preparations, ritual practices, and folk prayers that she prescribed for Eleanor's condition. Under Master Thomas's interpretation, these seemingly innocent remedies become evidence of a sophisticated, diabolic conspiracy designed to undermine Christian healing by offering alternative treatments that produce results through supernatural rather than natural means. The very effectiveness of Marjorie's gentle approach to fertility problems becomes proof of its diabolic nature in the twisted logic of medieval theological reasoning. Eleanor's defense relies on her insistence that she sought Marjorie's help as folk medicine rather than supernatural assistance, that she never intended to invoke diabolic forces, and that she believed she was simply trying alternative remedies for a medical condition that licensed physicians had failed to cure. Her testimony reveals the desperate circumstances that drove her to seek unauthorized help, the years of painful and ineffective treatments, the mounting social pressure to conceive, and the growing suspicion that her childlessness might be interpreted as evidence of spiritual corruption. However, Eleanor's defense fails to satisfy the theological requirements of medieval justice, which holds that ignorance of supernatural involvement does not excuse participation in diabolic practices. According to Master Thomas's interpretation of canon law, Eleanor's consultation with Marjorie constitutes trafficking with forbidden forces regardless of her conscious intentions, and her successful pregnancy following that consultation provides objective evidence of supernatural assistance that damns her, regardless of her subjective understanding of the events. The court's deliberation focuses not on whether Eleanor actually received diabolic assistance. Master Thomas considers that proven by the sequence of events, but on the appropriate punishment for her crimes. The penalties available under church law range from public penance and excommunication for minor supernatural offenses to imprisonment and death for serious cases of diabolic trafficking. The factors that will determine Eleanor's sentence include the extent of supernatural involvement in her case, the degree of conscious participation she demonstrated in seeking diabolic assistance, and the potential danger she poses to Christian society if allowed to remain at liberty. Master Thomas argues for severe punishment on the grounds that Eleanor's case represents a particularly dangerous form of diabolic deception that threatens to undermine trust in orthodox medical and spiritual authority. He contends that Eleanor's ability to achieve pregnancy through unauthorized means, while licensed physicians failed, demonstrates the seductive power of diabolic alternatives to Christian healing. Her success in concealing her supernatural activities while maintaining the appearance of orthodox piety makes her a threat to other women who might be tempted to follow her example if she escapes serious consequences. The theological implications of Eleanor's case extend beyond her individual situation to broader questions about the relationship between divine will and human reproduction that trouble medieval religious authorities. If Eleanor's pregnancy resulted from diabolic assistance, what does that suggest about God's plan for human fertility? If supernatural forces can grant the blessing of children that God has withheld, what does that mean for Christian understanding of divine providence? Eleanor's case forces the Church to confront uncomfortable questions about the limits of divine power and the effectiveness of orthodox healing that challenge fundamental assumptions about spiritual authority. The court's final judgment reflects medieval Christianity's deep anxiety about any challenge to its monopoly over healing and its interpretation of medical success outside orthodox channels as evidence of supernatural crime. Eleanor is found guilty of trafficking with diabolic forces through her consultation with Marjorie, of deceiving authorized healers about the true source of her pregnancy, and of corrupting the natural order through supernatural assistance with conception. The court sentences her to public penance, confiscation of property, excommunication from the church, and imprisonment for a term to be determined by her ongoing cooperation with efforts to identify and prosecute other women involved in similar supernatural crimes. The sentence represents a compromise between Master Thomas's desire for severe punishment and recognition that Eleanor's case lacks some of the aggravating factors typically associated with the worst supernatural crimes. Eleanor did not actively seek to harm others through diabolic means, did not attempt to corrupt children or other vulnerable people, and showed evidence of repentance once confronted with the true nature of her activities. However, her successful deception of authorized healers and the dangerous precedent her case might set for other desperate women require punishment severe enough to deter similar activities in the future. The implementation of Eleanor's sentence destroys the life she had built with Hugh, while providing medieval authorities with an example they hope will discourage other women from seeking unauthorized assistance with medical problems. Eleanor must perform public penance by standing outside St. Lawrence Jewry, dressed in rough sackcloth, while confessing her crimes to anyone who will listen. Her property is confiscated to compensate the church for the costs of investigating her case and to provide restitution for the spiritual damage caused by her trafficking with diabolic forces. Her excommunication cuts her off from the sacraments and social relationships that defined her identity as a respectable merchant's wife. Most tragically, Eleanor's imprisonment separates her from the infant son, whose conception had been the desperate goal that led her to seek Marjorie's assistance in the first place. The child is placed in the care of church authorities who will raise him in ignorance of his mother's supposed crimes, while monitoring him for signs of the supernatural corruption that they believe may have influenced his conception. Eleanor's success in achieving pregnancy, which should have been the fulfillment of her deepest desires, becomes the evidence used to destroy everything she held dear. Hugh faces his own consequences for his association with Eleanor's crimes, though the church recognizes that husbands cannot always be held responsible for their wives' secret activities. His business suffers from the scandal associated with Eleanor's conviction, and many of his former customers and associates distance themselves from any connection to supernatural crime. The guild members who had once respected his prosperity now view him with suspicion as someone whose success might have been tainted by diabolic assistance. Hugh must rebuild his life and reputation while dealing with the loss of both his wife and his son to the consequences of seeking unauthorized medical help. The broader impact of Eleanor's case extends throughout London's community of women, creating an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that makes it dangerous for anyone to seek folk remedies or traditional healing practices. Women who had previously shared herbal knowledge and folk treatments with friends and neighbors now worry that such activities could be interpreted as evidence of supernatural crime. The wise women and cunning folk who had provided alternative healing for generations find themselves driven underground or forced to abandon their practices entirely as church authorities intensify efforts to identify and prosecute unauthorized healers. The medical establishment uses Eleanor's case to reinforce the authority of licensed physicians and their bizarre theories about women's bodies, pointing to her conviction as proof that alternative approaches to fertility problems inevitably involve diabolic influences that endanger both body and soul. Master Geoffrey claims vindication for his fumigation treatments, arguing that their initial failure resulted from Eleanor's simultaneous consultation with diabolic forces that interfered with Christian healing. Master William uses the case to justify his invasive procedures, contending that Eleanor's infections and complications demonstrated her body's resistance to orthodox treatment caused by supernatural corruption. The theological implications of Eleanor's conviction resonate throughout medieval Christianity's understanding of healing and divine providence, reinforcing the Church's interpretation of illness as spiritual trial and medical success outside orthodox channels as evidence of supernatural crime. Eleanor's case becomes a cautionary tale used in sermons and religious instruction to warn against the temptation to seek unauthorized assistance with problems that God intends as tests of faith. Her story serves as an example of how diabolic forces exploit human desperation to corrupt souls and undermine Christian society through the seductive promise of forbidden solutions to natural suffering. Feel the profound sadness that settles over our story now, dear listener, as we witness the full consequences of a world where medical ignorance masqueraded as learned authority, and where desperate women who sought healing became victims of the very system that claimed to protect them. Eleanor's tragic fate illuminates the broader pattern of suffering that medieval medicine inflicted upon countless women whose only crime was refusing to accept ineffective treatments sanctioned by orthodox authority. Eleanor's imprisonment in the Church's custody represents the ultimate triumph of medieval medicine's bizarre theories over common sense and effective healing. Confined to a stone cell beneath St. Lawrence Jury, she is cut off from the gentle herbal remedies that had actually helped her conceive and subjected instead to continued treatments designed to purge her body and soul of the supposed diabolic influences that Church authorities believe enabled her pregnancy. These treatments include regular bloodletting to reduce the corrupt humors that supposedly allowed supernatural forces to take hold in her body, forced consumption of blessed substances intended to cleanse her of spiritual contamination, and exposure to holy relics that are meant to drive out any lingering diabolic presence. The irony of Eleanor's situation becomes apparent as her health deteriorates under the harsh regimen prescribed by her ecclesiastical jailers. The woman who had finally achieved pregnancy through Marjorie's gentle, nourishing approach to fertility treatment now suffers from the same invasive interventions that had failed to help her conceive during her years of orthodox medical care. Her jailers interpret her declining health as evidence that the purification process is working to expel diabolic influences from her body, not recognizing that their treatments are destroying the very vitality that had enabled her to become pregnant in the first place. Meanwhile, Eleanor's infant son faces his own tragic consequences from the Church's victory over folk healing. raised by ecclesiastical authorities who view him as potentially corrupted by the supernatural circumstances of his conception, the child is subjected to constant scrutiny for signs of diabolic influence that might manifest as he grows older. Any unusual intelligence, physical prowess, or remarkable health will be interpreted as evidence of his supernatural origins rather than natural gifts that should be celebrated. The boy who should have been Eleanor's greatest joy becomes instead another victim of medieval medicine's inability to distinguish between natural healing and supernatural crime. Hugh's attempts to appeal Eleanor's conviction and secure her release illustrate the hopelessness of challenging medieval medical and religious authority. Once accusations of supernatural involvement have been accepted by ecclesiastical courts, his efforts to present evidence that Eleanor's pregnancy resulted from effective folk medicine rather than diabolic assistance fall on deaf ears among church officials who have already invested too much authority in their interpretation of her case to admit error. The very success of Marjorie's treatments becomes proof of their diabolic nature in the circular logic of medieval theological reasoning, making it impossible to argue that Eleanor achieved pregnancy through natural means. The fate of other women caught up in the broader investigation sparked by Eleanor's case reveals the systematic nature of medieval medicine's persecution of effective healing practices that challenged orthodox authority. Several women who had consulted with Marjorie or other folk healers about fertility problems face similar charges of trafficking with diabolic forces, regardless of whether their treatments proved successful. The Church's investigation expands to include women who had shared herbal knowledge with friends, who had participated in traditional fertility rituals, or who had simply expressed skepticism about the effectiveness of licensed physicians' treatments. Most tragically, the investigation leads to the execution of Marjorie herself, whose knowledge of gentle, effective approaches to fertility problems is branded as diabolic wisdom that threatens Christian society. The cunning woman who had actually helped Eleanor achieve pregnancy through nourishing herbal treatments and practical advice about timing and positioning dies in flames, while the licensed physicians whose harsh interventions had failed for years continue to practice their ignorant theories with the full support of church and secular authority. Marjorie's death represents the ultimate triumph of medieval medicine's commitment to maintaining orthodox authority over acknowledging the effectiveness of alternative healing approaches. The broader consequences of Eleanor's case extend throughout English society as church authorities use her conviction to justify increased persecution of folk healers and traditional medical practices that had served communities for generations. Women who had previously shared knowledge about herbs, childbirth, and reproductive health now find themselves subject to suspicion and potential prosecution if their advice proves more effective than treatments prescribed by licensed physicians. The informal networks of female medical knowledge that had helped women cope with fertility problems, difficult pregnancies, and other reproductive challenges are systematically destroyed through fear of accusations that such knowledge represents diabolic influence. The medical establishment exploits Eleanor's conviction to reinforce the authority of their bizarre theories about women's bodies and to suppress criticism of their ineffective and often harmful treatments. Physicians point to Eleanor's case as proof that women who seek alternatives to orthodox medical care inevitably fall prey to diabolic influences that corrupt both body and soul. They use her story to justify continued reliance on treatments based on ancient theories about wandering wombs, humoral imbalances, and supernatural influences, rather than developing more effective approaches based on careful observation of actual results. The theological implications of Eleanor's case resonate throughout medieval Christianity's understanding of suffering and divine providence, reinforcing interpretations that discourage seeking relief from conditions that the Church considers divinely ordained trials. Eleanor's story becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of refusing to accept childlessness as God's will and seeking unauthorized assistance to overcome obstacles that might be intended as tests of faith. Her conviction supports theological arguments that suffering should be endured through prayer and penance rather than addressed through practical measures that might circumvent divine intentions. The educational impact of Eleanor's case extends to the training of future physicians and theologians, who learn from her story that medical success achieved through unauthorized means should be interpreted as evidence of supernatural crime rather than vindication of alternative healing approaches. Medical students studying Eleanor's case are taught to view any treatment that produces better results than orthodox methods as potentially diabolic in nature, reinforcing the system's resistance to innovation and improvement. Theological students learn that apparent healing miracles achieved outside church authority should be presumed diabolic until proven otherwise, creating lasting prejudice against folk healing traditions that had often proven more effective than orthodox alternatives. The social consequences of Eleanor's conviction create lasting damage to relationships between women and the medical establishment, fostering distrust that makes it more difficult for physicians to provide effective care even when their treatments might actually help. Women who might have benefited from legitimate medical intervention become reluctant to seek help from licensed physicians, for fear that unsuccessful treatment could lead to accusations of seeking unauthorized alternatives. The climate of suspicion and fear created by cases like Eleanor's makes it dangerous for women to discuss their medical problems openly or to share experiences that might help others facing similar challenges. The legal precedent established by Eleanor's case provides a framework for future prosecutions of women who seek unauthorized medical assistance, creating a system that systematically punishes desperation and ingenuity while protecting medical incompetence under the guise of orthodox authority. Future cases involving women who achieve medical success through folk remedies or alternative treatments will be judged according to standards established in Eleanor's trial, standards that interpret effectiveness outside orthodox channels as evidence of supernatural crime rather than validation of practical wisdom. Years later, as Eleanor wastes away in ecclesiastical custody and her son grows up ignorant of his mother's fate, the ultimate tragedy of her story becomes clear. A woman whose only crime was seeking effective treatment for a medical condition that orthodox medicine failed to understand died a slow death, while the ignorant theories that had failed to help her continued to be taught as authoritative knowledge. The gentle healing practices that had actually enabled her to conceive were branded as diabolic, while the harsh interventions that had caused her years of suffering retained their status as orthodox medicine blessed by church authority. Eleanor's story illuminates the broader tragedy of medieval medicine's systematic persecution of effective healing in favor of maintaining orthodox authority based on ignorant theories inherited from ancient sources. Her fate represents the consequences faced by countless women who dared to seek alternatives to treatments that failed them, women whose desperation made them vulnerable to accusations of supernatural crime when they found relief through methods that challenged medical orthodoxy. The world that destroyed Eleanor for achieving pregnancy through folk healing was the same world that would continue to torture women with bizarre theories about wandering wombs, humoral imbalances, and diabolic influences for centuries to come. As we return from Eleanor's tragic world to the comfort of your modern surroundings, perhaps we can carry with us something more than just another historical tale to ease us into sleep. Eleanor's story speaks across 6 centuries to remind us that the distance between their ignorant theories and our scientific understanding reflects not inevitable progress, but specific choices made by countless individuals who decided that evidence matters more than authority, that healing should be judged by results rather than orthodoxy, and that women's desperate search for help deserves compassion rather than suspicion. Eleanor's fate illuminates a world where learned men could declare with absolute confidence that wombs wandered through women's bodies like wild animals seeking pleasant scents, where physicians prescribed hollow lead tubes and burning fumigation as treatments for infertility. where successful healing achieved through gentle herbal remedies was interpreted as proof of diabolic influence rather than evidence of effective medicine. Her story reminds us how fortunate we are to live in a time when reproductive medicine is based on understanding of hormones and ovulation, rather than theories about humoral imbalances and supernatural intervention. Yet Eleanor's tragedy also challenges us to recognize the ways that ignorance and prejudice can still masquerade as authority in our own time, how desperation can still make vulnerable people targets for exploitation by those who claim special knowledge, and how the persecution of effective healing in favor of orthodox authority continues in various forms even today. Her story warns us to remain vigilant against the tendency to dismiss folk wisdom simply because it challenges academic orthodoxy, to question medical authorities who refuse to acknowledge the effectiveness of treatments they didn't prescribe, and to resist systems that punish women for seeking help outside approved channels. The gentle remedies that Marjorie prescribed for Eleanor, nourishing foods, supportive herbs, stress reduction, and practical advice about timing and positioning, represent approaches to fertility support that modern medicine has largely validated through scientific research. The aggressive interventions prescribed by Eleanor's licensed physicians, invasive procedures, harsh purgatives, fumigation with toxic substances, and psychological torture disguised as spiritual healing, represent exactly the kind of harmful practices that evidence-based medicine works to eliminate. Eleanor's story teaches us that effectiveness should matter more than authority, that gentleness often proves more healing than force, and that women's experiences of their own bodies deserve respect rather than dismissal. The broader lessons of Eleanor's tragedy extend beyond medical practice to questions about how societies treat those who challenge orthodox authority, how institutions respond to evidence that contradicts established theories, and how the powerful use accusations of moral corruption to suppress practical wisdom that threatens their control. Eleanor's fate warns us about the dangers of allowing ideological authorities to interpret evidence according to predetermined conclusions rather than adjusting theories to accommodate new information. Her story reminds us that progress requires courage to question established authorities and wisdom to recognize truth regardless of its source. Most importantly, Eleanor's story humanizes the countless women throughout history who suffered and died because effective healing was branded as forbidden knowledge, while harmful practices retained the blessing of orthodox authority. She represents every woman who sought help for fertility problems and found herself accused of moral failing when treatments failed. She speaks for every mother who lost children to medical ignorance while being told that their deaths served divine purposes. She embodies every healer whose practical knowledge was dismissed as superstition, while academic theories based on ancient prejudices continued to guide medical practice. As Eleanor's story fades into the background of your consciousness and sleep begins to claim your awareness, perhaps you can hold on to the profound gratitude we owe to those who fought to transform medicine from a system based on authority and tradition into one guided by evidence and compassion. Eleanor died so that future women might live, her suffering serving as testimony to the need for medical practices that prioritize healing over orthodoxy, that value effectiveness over authority, and that treat women's desperate search for help with understanding rather than suspicion. Sleep now, dear listener, and remember that Eleanor's legacy lives on in every woman who receives compassionate, evidence-based care for fertility problems, in every healer who prioritizes patient welfare over institutional authority, and in every society that has learned to distinguish between genuine healing and the persecution of those who dare to seek it. Until we meet again in another quiet corner of history, may your dreams carry the wisdom that effective healing deserves protection rather than persecution, that women's search for help deserves support rather than suspicion, and that the gentle remedies of folk wisdom often prove more healing than the harsh interventions of ignorant authority. If you found comfort in this journey through history's shadows, Please consider subscribing to join our community of gentle souls who believe the most important stories are often the hardest ones to hear. Like and share if this tale has touched your heart, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. There's something magical about knowing our little corner of history reaches around the world to bring people together in understanding and compassion. Good night, and may your sleep be as peaceful as the rest Eleanor finally found when her suffering ended, and as hopeful as the world we've built where her story serves as reminder rather than prophecy, where healing is judged by results rather than authority, and where women's search for motherhood is supported by science rather than persecuted by superstition.